Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for stopping by. I'm glad you're here. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a very simple but beautiful card that has the easiest ink blended background ever. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take a Versamark ink pad and I'm going to ink my stamp, and then I'm going to stamp it onto some watercolor cardstock. I'm using watercolor cardstock here because we're going to add some moisture later, and you want to use a paper that can handle that moisture. You could also use mixed media paper. This stamp that I'm using is from a Stampers Anonymous set called Exquisite, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's got a lot of detail, and some of this detail we're probably not going to see on the watercolor cardstock just because watercolor paper tends to have a little bit of texture to it. But I do like to hold my stamp firmly with one hand and then press around with the other one just to get as clear of an impression as possible. You could also use a stamp positioning tool to double or triple stamp it if you're wanting to go that route. For what I was trying to achieve here, I didn't find it was necessary. Then I am taking some clear embossing powder and I'm sprinkling that over my stamped image. Now, to create the same look as what I have at the end, you could ink your background and then just stamp and emboss with white powder afterwards. But I just really like the look of the image, the stamped image, kind of emerging from the inked background as I'm inking it. So I tend to like to do it this way. Another alternative, if you do your technique this way, is you could also, once your background is inked, you could put your paper between two pieces of newsprint and then iron it and remove the embossing and have kind of a batik look. So once I've got my image embossed, I'm taking my ink pads and I'm just rubbing them over the background. I've got Speckled Egg, Broken China, and Seedless preserves here. These are a really pretty combination with the three of them. And I definitely wanted to have a light and a dark blue just to get a bit of color variation there. I didn't want the Seedless preserve to completely take over the background, so I chose to put those two down first and then add my Seedless preserves. And you can see that I'm not being particularly careful with where I'm putting it. I just want to make sure that I have some dark color around that stamped image so that that image really pops. Once I've got my ink down, I'm taking a water mister bottle and I'm just spraying it liberally so that that ink starts to run. I do leave it for about 5 minutes with just the water on there so that the ink has time to run. And then I go back, as you can see here, and I take a paper towel and I blot some of the excess ink from the embossing. It's never going to dry on that embossing, so I like to leave it there to make sure that some gets in the cracks, but then I do blot it up. In order to give the background a little bit of shimmer, I have a mini mister here that I made my own shimmer spray with, and that's just water in the little mini mister with some Perfect Pearls. And the color that I had for that one was mint, and it went perfectly with this background. This watercolor paper was a little bit too big, so I'm cutting it down so that it ends up being 5¼ inches by 4 inches. You could, if you want, cut it down to the right size ahead of time, but by doing it this way, you can choose exactly what part gets cut off and what part stays, and you can kind of have a little bit of control over which parts are on your cardstock or on your background. Now, I absolutely love the way the background looks, but I wanted to add a die cut butterfly to the front just to give it a little bit of dimension, just something popping off of the background. So the butterfly that I'm using is called Detail Butterfly. It's got a solid image and then it's got a butterfly wing image that has some cutouts in it. So I'm taking my two blues and I'm going to ink my butterfly. I'm making it so that they're the lighter blue is towards the center and then the darker blue is towards the outside of the butterfly. I'm going to take my Distress Collage medium and I'm just going to put that in along the body of the butterfly so that those two pieces are attached right there. I'm using Distress Collage medium because if any happens to squeeze out, it dries completely clear and it dries matte, so you'll never know that there was glue there. I decided that I wanted the body of the butterfly to pop just a little bit more. So I took some of the scraps of the paper that I had die cut and cut out another butterfly. This doesn't need to be a complete butterfly because I'm only using the body part to it. I'm letting that ink dry for a moment and gluing my background onto my card base. I have a really pretty purple card base that coordinates with this background, and it's going to help that purple kind of pop on that back there. So I'm going to glue that down, and then I like to put an acrylic block on there just to hold it in place for me while I'm working on other stuff. This way I don't have to actually hold that while that glue is drying. Now my inked body butterfly, I'm going to cut off of the wings. Now I'm doing this the most awkward way possible. Really, this is just an awkward way to do it. Make sure if you do it like this that you don't accidentally snip yourself. I just had nothing else to hold on to hold or to cut that body away. So once that body is off of there, I'm just taking that same glue and I'm going to glue that purple body onto my butterfly die cut. After that, I am taking some Stickles and I'm also taking some glossy accents. I'm just going to add those accents to the butterfly. For this particular project, I chose to do it before it was on the card background. Really, it would be a lot easier to do it while it is glued to the background of the card, because then I can hold on to the card base while adding the Stickles and the glossy accents to the butterfly. But I chose to do it the most difficult way apparently this time. So I just like to add the Stickles to the outside of the wings. And if you've never used Stickles before, it's a glitter glue, but it has a really fine tip, so you can get it exactly where you want it to go. And you can be really, really delicate and fine with this. You can add as much or as little as you want. I am of the opinion that less is more. And I think it looks pretty just with a little bit on there. But if you love glitter and want a lot on there, absolutely add as much as you want. So now I'm adding some glossy accents to the center of the butterfly just to give it a bit of a different texture. This is going to make that purple body glossy. When you use glossy accents and put it down first, it is kind of a milky color, but then it turns glossy as it dries. Now, if you're curious about any of the products that I'm using here, I'll have them all listed down below in the description. And if there's anything that I have missed or not covered, just pop a question in the comments. I'm happy to answer. So the last thing I'm adding is a sentiment here. I've got a sentiment strip that is embossed with silver on some white cardstock. This is from a tiny text stamp set from Stampers Anonymous. And I have a bunch of these. I like to stamp them and emboss the entire set at once and then cut up all my sentiments and have them sitting in a container so that anytime I need one, I have it ready to go. So I cut that apart into 3 different strips just to give it a little bit more interest on the front of the card. And I'm using some foam tape that is in little strips that I typically will use for my shaker cards, but it's perfect for these little sentiment strips. I'm putting that on the back of the sentiment and I'm just popping it onto the front of the card. Now I chose not to ink around the sentiment. I thought it popped better with just the white there. But you could, if you wanted to add some color to the edge of your sentiment, you could go and rub it on an ink pad and have it inked just to have it look like it's got a little bit more of a frame to it. It's really a personal preference thing. Now, as I said, I'm using foam tape on the back of these just to give them a little bit of extra dimension. But if you didn't want that, you could glue it down flat to the background of the card. Another option would be to take a similar color as the card base and mat each one of these. If you wanted them all framed really, really nicely, you could do that as well. But I thought the white looked nice on its own. And there is the finished card with the easiest ink blended background ever. I absolutely love all those colors together. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a fabulous day.